Hello, my name is Eric Anthony Lopez. Sorry, trying to get the setup right for my so my phone hold up and record. There we go. So my name is Eric Anthony Lopez. This is my module 5 and 6 review. So, what did I learn about the law this week? I think this week I learned that the law is, law in general or law in our everyday life is in a very sensitive area right now. So this week, for Module 6, we watched the videos on abortion being repealed and how pro-lifer, and we also learned more information between pro-life and pro-abortion. So I'm just going to go on my personal side about this before I go into the political side and everything. So personal beliefs, I believe a woman has a right to choose what she should do with her body because no government should have control over what a person does in general. They shouldn't have control over what music I watch, what videos I watch, what food I eat and stuff like that. You know, the government can recommend things for people to do better, like the health programs they had for kids when Michelle Obama was in place, and some of the health programs they still do have in place. And, pricing out and taxing out unhealthier food options so people don't feel like the need to have to constantly eat unhealthy food. But the government also doesn't do its due diligence in helping with those situations. For example, pro-life is all about, the fetus has a pulse. It's alive. It is alive right now, right this second. That's great. But if the mother doesn't want to have the baby because it has compromising health complications. For example, my birth mother, I talked about this before, I believe. If she had to keep the baby to term, her third child, that she had to get an abortion, she would have not lived the pregnancy, and the baby would have been dead. It would have been terminally. It wouldn't be able to live because it wasn't having oxygen flow through it when it was inside of her. So what would have happened if the baby had died and she had to carry it? Well, I just recently read an article and did my research on this. A woman in Louisiana, I believe, had been carrying her baby, but the baby was not going to come to term. And when she needed to get the operation to get it aborted right away. But because of the laws in place, I think it was actually Texas. Sorry, it was Texas. Because of the laws in place in Texas, she couldn't get the abortion she needed in the moment. And now she's hooked up to a ventilator because of a infection that had spawned off from the fetus dying off inside of her. Because she held a dead fetus inside of her body for an additional 12 hours because she had to wait until its pulse no longer beated because it was still alive. But the doctors did confirm that if they had done the operation and before the fetus had to be terminally dead inside of her, she would have been fine. She wouldn't have to have been hooked up to a ventilator now. But now she has to live the rest of her life like that. That's the problem with pro-lifers. They don't recognize in the moment what could happen to the people who are affected by the pregnancy. It's all about their agenda in mind. They always think about what's right for their life because it coincides with their personal beliefs. Like what last week's review on the Supreme Court, where they had their agendas in mind for each decision they made instead of the agendas of the people entirely. So this comes back to what I said before. People are selfish. People want to choose what's best for them and best for them at heart, which is the same for pro-abortion and pro-choice. But pro-choice actually is better for a group of people as a whole. If a woman is sexually assaulted and she has a child through it, she doesn't have to deal with the stress of raising her tormentor's child, letting that legacy continue. If she has complexing birth problems, complexing health conditions that could affect the baby or herself's life, she can have the abortion, not have to worry about it. But because we are living in a society now that basically dictates, hey, abortion's no longer cool, guys. Sorry, you can't have it. A lot of people could end up dead because of it. And I'm going to talk about the Module 5 stuff now because I really don't want to keep talking about the Module 6 stuff because you know what? It just sets me on a path where I'm just like, I live in a country now where my government has dictatorship, because that's what it is, over what a woman can or can't do with her body. And it's just going to start a domino effect that will trickle down into other rights like gay marriage, um, voting rights for African Americans, voting rights for Latinx or Hispanic or Latino Americans. It's all just like a bigger picture thing that people don't recognize. Is that, oh yeah, I got my rights. No more women. They don't get abortions anymore. That's right. We're living by God's rules. Wait, what do you mean more people dying? What do you mean we're getting more orphans in the system? No, people don't think of that. People don't think of the practical. They don't think, what is really practical about things going on. And I'm going to say this because I said it before in one of my responses. If you're pro-life, you should also be pro-adoption. Because, we have a lot of kids in the system that are just getting constantly screwed over. This video is going to run a little bit longer. And you know what? I wanted to because I have a lot to talk about on this subject. If you're pro-life, you should be pro-adoption. Because what happens if a girl just normally has sex and has a child out of wedlock with her boyfriend but doesn't want to raise the kid because she's 18 and she has her whole life ahead of her? She's going to put up for adoption. And then who's that baby's problem? It's the state's problem. It's not the mother's problem anymore because she gave up that right to be the mother. It's the state's problem. And now that kid gets stuck in foster care, an orphanage, or something else. And they're a baby. That's not to say that babies don't get adopted, but the adoption process is also a pain in the ass. And then there's also the fact that we have problems with people just in general with the foster care system because we have terrible foster parents who just use the money that the government gives you on themselves and they don't use it on the kids themselves. I was raised from a separation, so I know what that's like where your parent uses the money that's supposed to be used for your food, your clothes, your drinks, everything that's supposed to get you by on a day-to-day basis, and your mom just spends all that money on alcohol, booze, weed, any kind of drug. I know what it's like. Even though I wasn't raised in that kind of system, I share the similarities and the pain that goes through it. But I digress. Now I'm going to talk about Module 5 real quick. So Module 5 talked about the Fifth Amendment. I believe it was the Fifth Amendment. Either way, it's the amendment where you can't perjure yourself or you can't willingly accept a search and seizure from cops and stuff like that. Why did I think that was important? I thought that was important because this was another point where you're teaching students how to protect themselves with the law, because not a lot of people know how to use the law to protect themselves. A lot of people get intimidated and they admit to things that they didn't do because their lawyer isn't present. Police intimidation is a real thing that happens, and a lot of people are intimidated by the police because the police sometimes are very scary. My uncle, he's a cop, but he's a good cop. Not to say that, unfortunately, there is good and bad in the situation, where there are good cops who follow their training and know how to handle the situation peacefully, non-violence, non-aggression, when there are also cops who are bad cops that follow their training but make the split-second decisions in the worst ways possible, or have their personal agendas affect their decisions based on the situation at hand. The media has a good way of depicting that the cops are usually in the wrong and that the community doesn't trust cops anymore, which is very true. The community and policing is very strenuous at this time, still with after effects of what happened in 2020, I believe, with George Floyd when we were in lockdown. But, basically learning to protect yourself with the law is the best way possible, because I had a friend who was basically walking home from a club one night and she was arrested because a fight had happened and broken out and she had been there, and the cops had been harassing her, had basically arrested her, had basically intimidating her, goading her into enacting and attacking them to basically just get them to be we have probable cause, we're going to arrest you now. And she was left in a overnight cell. She's anemic, and she also just was in pure agonizing pain and didn't have access to a lawyer for 12 hours. It's inhumane. It's inhumane how people can abuse the power that they have at their hand because people have a lack of knowledge of the law. And that's why it's important to know the law in everyday life, because when you have a better knowledge of how to use the law to your advantage, because unfortunately there is no good way of using the law, there is no bad way of using the law. It's all subjective term. Those are subjective terminologies. The only way to use the law is the way it's best serve you and protect yourself, because if you don't have a way to protect yourself with the law, you're going to be screwed in a lot of senses. Because if you don't have your birth certificate, your original birth certificate, and you happen to be Hispanic, Latino American, you can be deported because you don't have access to an American birth certificate. Congratulations, you don't know how to protect yourself in the law in that case, and you're an illegal immigrant. They're going to send you back to a country you've never been to, a country where you have no resources, where your money is basically useless. So, summarize it. Module 5, protecting yourself about the law again. Module 6, informing us about the current strenuous situations with everyday life and law, with pro-abortion, pro-life, all of those choices. Personally, pro-choice. I almost said pro-life. Pro-choice, because nobody should have any say on what you have to do with your body, because at the end of the day, it is your body. You know what is best for you. Have a good one.